All right, we're back.
Meow.
That is a great movie, by the way, if you ever heard that.
Which movie?
We're Back.
I haven't heard it.
With who?
We're so back.
It's it's a movie about dinosaurs. It's neat. It's yeah, I don't know.
That's
I think it's
cute.
a Bluth film. You know Don Bluth?
No.
Okay, anyway.
Great movie. We're so back.
Speaking of people who aren't dinosaurs, we have today on the podcast Gideon, Nweze, and Hunter Beast from, you guys are from DIBA. Is that your,
Yes, sir.
professional association?
Yes, sir.
Awesome.
It's called DIBA Global.
Okay, there we go. Worldwide.
Diva Worldwide. We should get Pitbull. Mr. Worldwide.
Yeah, Mr. Worldwide. You need a mascot.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think the mascots here are pretty solid.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I guess we're sort of talking about RGB today, but also other things.
Yeah, you guys are from DIBA. DIBA kind of started out startup doing a digital asset marketplace using RGB, which is I guess would you call it an L2 or is it like is RGB an L2 on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think it's a safe way to conceptualize it, and some also call it like an L3 because it can also color coins on Lightning.
Mm-hmm.
I also think RGB can be called 1.5. So, it depends on like how you see it. RGB is pretty much like, it's kind of this interesting thing that you can really it's very modular and you can really abstract it into like different layers.
Mm-hmm.
I also I came up with this like site, I call it Layered Bitcoin, and it's kind of like inspired by Nick Badia's book and Layered Money, and I just like wanted to like kind of outline some of the layered narratives and kind of deconstruct that and examine like that a little bit more, just because I think about layers a lot in my line of work, and I'd like to actually get more feedback on that too, layeredbitcoin.com. But the idea is there's you could enumerate the layers, but that is so fraught with like nuance.
Just depends on how you define them.
It's
right?
so bad, and so the other way you can do it is just like by classifying it. You could call it like a contracts layer.
Mm-hmm.
Yo, Casey, but it's ordinals 1.5.
I was gonna say, what's ordinals?
Yeah,
like what layer?
I think it kind of
put
depends.
that under an index layer actually.
Yeah, like it doesn't, ordinals.
It reminds me a lot of Electrum.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't have its own network, which I kind of think of as being part of
being another layer.
Being an L2 maybe is that you have like another network where peers are exchanging messages that are like related somehow to data that's already on chain or that's going to be on chain.
You could also call it a storage layer. And I had now that I recall, I had Electrum under an accounts layer. And so if accounts is what Electrum provides as an index, then ORD, do you still call it ORD?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. ORD will essentially be a storage layer. Yeah. I think that's a good way to conceptualize it.
So I think like RGB is very hard to understand. I've had a lot of.
Oh, there is one other thing. I'm sorry to interrupt, but like one thing I totally like. It's funny. You need to have ordinal theory in order to do inscriptions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Because if you have to be able to enumerate every SAT. And in order to like have them be non-fungible.
Yeah.
Well, you could inscribe, right? But you just couldn't you could put the content. You couldn't track it.
Or ordinals are basically just a hack to have some sort of transferable, durable vehicle for an inscription, right? Like inscriptions are just like you put the data on chain, but then Bitcoin has a UTXO model, not an account model. So the question of like who owns an inscription is like, okay, well, you can't do that, right? You don't know how to do that, or there's no natural way to do that in Bitcoin. So ordinals was just like, okay, how can I create something that can move from UTXO to UTXO and represent the ordinals or the inscription?
Classify it as a storage layer and then put in the like kind of the stipulation that a storage layer requires an accounts layer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because and accounting is what ordinal theory essentially is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's very interesting. I mean, I think like, is there any consensus layer on ordinals? I don't know.
Well, I mean, it depends on what you mean by consensus layer.
Yeah,
like,
well, it's client side validated in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, it's all, the state is all on Bitcoin, and you have different indices that read, messages on Bitcoin, and they all come up with their own state. And so to some extent, like, clients that interact with each other have to agree on some subset of that state, namely the inscriptions and the location of those inscriptions. There isn't like a global consensus in that two nodes can track different parts of the state. Sort of like if you're using Bitcoin light clients, you might have two light clients interacting, and they're only verifying a subset of the state on Bitcoin.
So that was a problem with the numbering, the inscription numbers. That was the reason for that. Right?
The
debates. I would call it a debate.
Yeah. So inscriptions get a number in the order in which they're mined, and this is one maybe the only kind of global state that ordinals and inscriptions has, and that's what makes it, I think, kind of a mistake to have added it in the first place. Because otherwise, like, nodes, as I said, they can agree on only a subset of the state. But with numbers, the numbering depends on all of the inscriptions that came beforehand. And so you can only agree on the numbering if you both agree on all of the inscriptions that came beforehand.
And to be honest, I was super, stoked that you came to that realization and championed that cause, though you didn't move forward with completely breaking the numbering, which disappointed me a little bit. Just like the
degens, they really hated it. The
degens,
But I'll tell you why. My own selfish interest is somebody who's very heavily invested in the RGB ecosystem as a developer in the RGB ecosystem for the past 2 years. That is the one thing RGB can't do is enumerate a global a global enumeration. Mm-hmm. And so basically taking that out of ordinals essentially it basically reduces the amount of differentiation between the two, other than just that one's on chain and one's off chain. But essentially, yeah, in some ways, global ordering is a bit of there's a market for that. There's a lot of demand, I will acknowledge. And so if you can kind of guarantee at a protocol level, something like that, I think the degens would be they would be really super appreciative.
Yeah, the degens, they really like that.
They like the numbers.
Yeah.
What number you are. But also, most of those numbers are filled with freaking JSON. It's
well, yeah, let's get to the JSON later. Before, by way of intro, I'm actually kind of curious about your guys' background. Yeah. Gideon, do you want to start? How did you
give us your
get into Bitcoin? What led you to DIBA? What's your path here?
Yeah, so I've lived this very interesting life, right? So do you know I speak Russian?
No.
Wow.
Yeah, so I did my college in Russia, right? So
really?
Yeah.
Wait, how did that happen? Where are you from originally?
I was born in Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I did my college in Russia, and then I did nanotechnology and microelectronics engineering, which is a minor in physics and math. And then while I was in college, I studied these things in Russian language, right? So I was a little bit bored. And I started a company. And then
wait. So how did you wind up in Russia?
In Russia. So after high school, I went to this pretty good school, and then I got scholarship to 40 different countries.
Wow.
So I chose Russia to do nuclear physics. And my parents said, no. Yeah, so, essentially I ended up saying, okay, let's have a compromise, okay? But I'm on scholarship, so you don't have to pay for me, right? I want to go to Russia, so...
It's just a little spooky, just a little bit of spook there. Yeah. Okay, filing that away.
Yeah, so I did nanotechnology there, yeah. So I was it was pretty interesting. Because, I think that when I was in college, I loved physics, right? So I was the way Russians look at physics and math and the way they solve problems is just very, very different from the Western world. And I was what? I'm pretty curious, how I was just out of curiosity I went to Russia, right? I was thinking, my mindset then was that, hey, if I get to understand the way people solve problems like this, I will still be able to like merge these two worlds together, and I'll be able to like solve problems in a very interesting way. So that's what I was thinking about, right? And yeah, that's why I went to Russia.
All right. And then you started a company.
I started a company there, and then one day I was drinking wine with a friend. He's from Ukraine. He gives me 0.5 Bitcoin, and I'm like, what is that? All right. And then I made fun of him, right? And then he eventually showed me that it's real money. Then Bitcoin, that was in 2015 or 16 or so, right? And I'm like, pretty interesting. So I took a vacation for the weekend, went to go read the Bitcoin white paper and the Ethereum white paper. After reading that, the next week I met Vitalik in Moscow.
Oh, really?
And yeah. So it's like things just accelerated
little spooky
so fast.
as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah. And then I met the guy that built Waves blockchain. He's based in Moscow then. That was like early 2017 before the whole thing like went crazy. And then I ended up like trying to understand like why does this technology work? Because like as someone who's from Nigeria, right? I think that growing up in a place where people don't even have a dollar account up till today, right? And it's so bad because the government would not even want you to do that. When I was a kid, 1 naira was about $5. Now it's about 1,000. Sorry, $1 was about $1 was about $5 naira. Now it's about 1,000 naira. So it's like these are like real problems, and I think that we're moving into a future where people anywhere in the world should have access to global assets that are not, and they're not being forced to get depreciating assets, right? And so like, but apart from that, like the whole thing on Bitcoin white paper and Ethereum Pro was like pretty cool. So yeah, that's why I was like, you know what? Yeah, that was part of my early convictions.
And did you what got you more interested in Bitcoin or made you interested in Bitcoin when there were all these other chains that did all this other stuff?
Oh yeah, I ventured in all of that, right? So I ran a bunch of hackathons, right? So I've been doing hackathons since, and then I had one where we had about like 3,000, 4,000 people on Discord. This was in 2019. But then I got COVID. So COVID changed my whole life. When I got COVID, I was lying down, I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. And I'm like, I don't really want to die, right? And I'm like, God, please, I was born in a Christian family, right? So I was like, if I survive this, I will spend my life doing things that will add value to the world. Like, not just because of money, right? But I'm like, and I also try to make some money doing it, right? And then after that, I survived COVID. It was really bad. So I was working with a friend who I convinced, who was one of the best engineers at Google. He was an AI guy. I convinced him to quit from Google, and we were like working on something. And after COVID, I realized that this is not who I am and what I should be doing. So I called him and I quit. And I was like, I'm going to focus on Bitcoin.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Wow, thanks, COVID.
COVID and a merciful God.
Yeah, can you imagine, right?
Hunter, what about you?
Oh, yeah. So where do you want me to start?
Just wherever you think the story gets interesting,
Oh, yeah. All right. So I started my professional career as a software engineer or developer, whatever you want to call it, because like I don't have a college degree, and some people are cognizant of whether you call it an engineer. But that said, the people I worked for called me an engineer. So
there you go. That's all that matters.
Yeah. And so anyway, I did that around 2012, and that was because I entered like community college around like 2010, and I stayed there a couple of years, and it went okay, and I did some neat stuff, and I thought I wanted to get into game development, but then I actually did a little bit of game development, like both like as a hobby and also kind of like as a contractor, and that kind of gave me perspective on the game dev industry to the point where like I didn't want to do that.
I actually had kind of the same experience. I always thought I wanted to get into game development, and then I did a internship between my like junior and senior year, I think, with a really cool company. The people were really great, But like it's crazy. Like it's a slog. People work super hard. The hours are crazy. You make way less money. There's so much pressure. And then I was like, all right, well that was cool, but I don't think I'm going to do that.
Like when I got into tech, I'd eventually come to realize it was like tech versus game dev is like, game dev is like twice the work with half the pay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Also, before I went into college, actually, I did I was in kind of like a different community college, 2008, and I was doing some lab work. I was helping. I was a lab assistant for like a guy who was like a PhD candidate, and we were studying biofuels from algae, and that was really neat. I got to like work with all sorts of different microbio equipment. Like I got to sequence genomes like with PCR and just all sorts of neat stuff. Run gels, electrophoresis, and like just all neat stuff.
We've been working for 2 years. I didn't know that. Wow, that's very exciting.
But a large part of the job was just taking like colonies from round plates and putting them into square plates, but under a sterile hood. The one thing that kind of gave me some insight into where my future career would go in that job was when they would usually approach me for like technical stuff, like how do I compile this program that does multi-sequence alignment, and like one thing to know about like PCR and like sequencing or like genetic sequencing is not PCR. PCR is different than sequencing, but the thing to know about sequencing is a genome is that the shorter the contiguous sequences, the context, the cheaper it is. And so what you usually do is you'll align them in using software.
Right. You sequence many small chunks and then use software to line up those chunks to get the whole genome.
Exactly, or at least longer contigs, and then you can upload them to a database like NCBI, and like you'll get like taxonomy and phylogeny and stuff, and then So anyway, that's in the weeds. But like I like another like a side passion of mine was biology, and I'd like to return to that someday. But that's one of those things where like maybe an alternate career path.
Well, we're sort of getting into zoology on this episode.
Oh yeah. But a lot of furries do get into biology because we're obsessed with the idea of freedom of form, and so
transhuman furrydom is coming.
Yeah,
you can become a cat girl for real, Aaron.
Yeah.
There's actually more than a few Bitcoiners who are like part of this like shadowy furry Illuminati where they like.
Oh really?
They're everywhere.
Anybody
honestly.
I would know?
Well,
you don't have to
dox,
out anybody.
yeah.
Don't dox. No dox.
Yeah.
Fur docs.
You don't say who's in the furry Illuminati, but anyway, the idea is to just like finance the potential transition to freedom of form, and it's like this like just like it's a we'll see how that goes, but anyway, it's like the super ambitious, almost like a secret project. And like if you ever played like Alpha Centauri or Civilization, it's like the Freedom of Form project,
Right.
It's lurking in the background, like for sure. Yeah. I see it. I mean, it actually kind of our last episode, we were Brian Johnson and Brian Johnson, meaning like the billionaire and the liver king.
Yeah.
In a way, they're both transhumanist in a way as well. Certainly, Brian Johnson, the billionaire, is.
Yeah.
And I
the
feel
liver
like
king,
it's
the liver king is transhumanist too. He's turning into some sort of red muscle. I'm
thinking of Bishop.
Brian Bishop.
Yeah.
Brian Bishop. He's a long time. I don't know if he's a dev but I know that he has transcribed tons and tons and tons of Bitcoin like events and stuff like that, like real time typing it up on his keyboard. He types like
I want to see you too.
he types like 500 words a minute.
It's
crazy.
funny. Kanzare and I actually go way back. We used to haunt IRC and still do to some degree. Haunt an IRC channel called I'll have to think of it, but it was like an Freenode back when Freenode was still cool. But yeah, it was like 2010, 2011, and that was a neat era. But 2012, I eventually come to work as a professional software dev, and I started with like NPM and JS and PHP. Actually, when I interviewed, I showed them some. I'd actually been a JS developer for 5 years prior to that job, and I just like printed out some of my code samples and like put them in a folder and gave them to them in the interview, and they were like thumbing over them. They were like, "All right, this is pretty good," and you can do jQuery, and it was for like a company that did websites for shopping malls, and so it was like a super like humble, like kind of chill kind of shop to like cut your teeth on, and I still like maintain relationships with like a lot of those people today, just like friendships, just like they're really, really cool people. And then pretty much every job after that, I just didn't really care to make it like, there's a few people, like one or two people from here and there I'll stay in touch with, but like otherwise it was, the first job was really special. And after that, I'd go and work in the ad tech industry, and like that was where like I'd kind of come to learn a bit more about my principles. And I stayed there all of 3 months, and I quit because I realized that we were not making the world better. It was like one thing I learned was that we had collected 1 megabyte worth of data for every impression, ad impression. Like, how do you get a 1 megabyte of data just from like a view? It's just of one little.
It's all like browser fingerprinting and like
exactly. And and also like stuff for like real time bidding markets and stuff. Yeah, but after that, I started my first startup, and this was like 2014 or so, and that went okay, and it's still around, I think, which is kind of a bit of a
that old thing's still kicking around.
Yeah, it's something to be proud of, right? That something you like started and made is still around. That's kind of cool. And then, I mean, I didn't personally benefit from it much, but that said, it's just like, it's cool that it's still around. And there's also, let's see, after that, I'd come to work for a database company here in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and they had an office on Market Street, and I'd come to learn a lot about databases, and it was actually a really neat kind of, it gave me like it gave me exposure to the jargon about databases, like what a wall is, right? And write a head log and like stuff like that, and replication factor and atomicity and acid compliance and cap theorem and stuff like that. I think you explained cap theorem on that one Discord call you did recently.
Did I? Consistency, availability, and
partition tolerance.
Partition tolerance.
Yeah.
Maybe. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? I don't think I used
I blacked out.
It's all good. It's all good. That was a cool little thing that you did with Discord. You just like went over, the code base and issues, and just described how ordinals worked. That was really neat.
Awesome.
But after that, I quit that job to get into Ethereum, because like Web3, that was like 2017. And I made my first Ethereum transaction in January 2017, and that was like pretty neat, because like I fell into that because I live in Denver, and so or near Denver, but anyway, there's a big ETH Denver kind of community around there, a bunch of shitcoiners, and they're great people, don't get me wrong, but like it's just like a different vibe there. And like pseudo Marxist, very like statist, like tech bro, like
I think that like the sort of pseudo Marxist statist, like they're just sort of much more tolerant of state interference and intervention, and maybe that makes them inherently a little bit less worried about centralization, because they ultimately see the state as playing a role in these networks, as opposed to something that tries to resist the state and be immune from state capture, like Bitcoin attempts to be.
Like for example, I heard on Twitter a little while back, actually I think it was just yesterday, things move so fast, that
life comes at you.
The Ethereum spot ETF wouldn't be a thing because it would. Like, it can't be a thing because it's an unregistered security. But then I spoke to somebody who actually worked for the NASDAQ, and he was like, actually, an unregistered security could just be a private company, and a private company could issue shares to a security, and they'll just wrap it up, and they'll offer it to a market. So like they have people,
it can be essentially bridged. It can be like laundered through a private company.
Right.
Yeah. And this is like the assumptions like Bitcoiners make, and so. We used to assume things behave like the same expectations of Bitcoin apply to everything else, and it's like, no, actually some ecosystems are perfectly like satisfied with the status solution, not defying the system in the slightest.
I think that's a good like point too, of just like misunderstanding the way that Ethereum people or anyone else conceives of themselves from like a Bitcoiner or a Bitcoin maxi point of view. Like I personally think you got to get in the weeds. You got to go to places like ETH Denver, and you have to hear how people talk about it there.
No doubt.
You can't just like project your own judgment of them and assume that that's the way that they think about it, because you're almost always wrong.
Yes. However, I did wear this same exact shirt to the last ETH Denver, and I just did not feel like it belonged. It felt like I feel like they kind of lost the plot a little bit. I mean, like Vitalik, he's a total Bitcoiner.
Yeah.
Like very much so.
Yeah, and all the Ethereum co-founders are Bitcoiners. All of them. Yeah. I mean, Vitalik actually founded Colored Coins. Do you know that?
Founded what?
Colored Coins.
No, I didn't know that.
So the other day I was doing a research.
Wait, what do you mean? Colored coins? Like just the first colored coins?
The first colored coins. Yeah, it was Vitalik with the white paper. Vitalik and many. Yeah, so I was going through it. I was like, wow, it's pretty interesting. So Vitalik was trying to build Ethereum on top of Bitcoin before, right? And so it's I mean, I think that Vitalik is not even really in charge of what happens in the Ethereum ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely not. There's too many vested interests.
There's so much vested interest. He can't do what he wants to do. And I think that's like one of the big problems in the ecosystem, right? Like when like vested interest takes over pure interest, like because we want to do things that's gonna like be impactful in the world, but when money comes in, money is a great thing too, but money can be really bad. Like money can like make people do things they don't want to do.
Let's not forget that one of the criticisms of Ethereum was that it was like its development is highly centralized, and like you could kidnap Vitalik, and what happens to Ethereum? Could they like introduce some kind of backdoor because they kidnapped him or coerced him somehow? But like if he's not that influential in the foundation or in the community, then it's kind of like an argument like, well, okay, actually maybe Ethereum is too decentralized to fail.
I just saw a video where Vitalik said that on all Ethereum L2s there are backdoors.
Yeah, this is true. Like, this is just like all
and
of
I'm like, what is that?
The
what?
Well, it's
it's that in the video.
Yeah, it's that. I mean, I think what he's referring to is that all of the Ethereum rollups, they have a technology which theoretically serves the rollup, which is, for example, fraud proofs. For optimistic rollups, it's fraud proofs and getting your bond slashed. Or for ZK rollups, it's that the sequencer that the sequencer will in a timely fashion publish ZK rollups on chain that represent the state. but all of them, because they're sort of in beta, they all just have a developer multisig, which can kind of like undo state transitions or whatever. And these are like major rollups. I think Optimism, the last time I looked at Optimism, this was the case. And it's hypothetically there for good reasons. It's, because it's like beta technology and they want to be able to undo mistakes. But it also means that these things are simply not decentralized at all, the ones that are currently running.
Well, let's never forget like Ethereum's original sin, like they're undoing a mistake, right? The
DAO hack.
The DAO hack,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And like I think it was Nuts Vamholm who did like a really good like I think it was an article about like the problem with Ethereum and how like we went over basically like all the different like ways that the Ethereum Foundation betrayed its original adopters and miners and just like went back on its promises and it always just fell back to the incumbent elites. And so I mean from like one thing that I started becoming more sensitive to in my career later on, I eventually came to work for like indirectly for Protocol Labs on a Rust version of the Filecoin protocol, and it one thing I learned there was I learned a lot about how Filecoin worked, and I was joking with Gideon. I like to characterize it as a sort of Pee Wee Herman's breakfast machine of a blockchain. Just like it requires.
From what I know about Filecoin, that seems pretty accurate.
Yeah, we don't have to go into that, but if somebody's curious, maybe somebody can ask me why. But it's there's also like this one weird thing that happened early on when it went from testnet to mainnet was they made the storage miners purchase their own field in order to stake, to earn money, to like when they go and stake on their sectors and then try to earn money with their money. And it's funny how like circular proof of stake is. It's just weird to me. It's not really mining. It's more like it's proof of stake gated by two forms of maybe proof of work, if you want to call them that.
Right.
And so anyway, it's the thing that happened like early on, and it was that because they were making the miners purchase their own fill, there was a huge liquidity crunch because like there wasn't enough fill being mined.
Right.
And so like there was a big spike and there was an all-time high. It went up like $160, $180 dollars per fill. And this was like just a thing that caught people's eyes. And so all the retail investors FOMO'd in. And then of course the miners dumped.
Yeah.
Once they got enough fill to mine.
Right.
And then like now it's the price is hovering at what, like $2 or $3 or whatever it is now. I don't even look at it, but like I pity the poor retail investor who is looking at the all-time high. Yeah. And just thinking, oh, it's so cheap right now. It'll come back. Yeah. It's like, no, that was a one-time event.
A lot of coins seem to follow that, right? They have their initial investors, they get in, they have a big pump up to like 100 times the current value, and then they decline and they just kind of shuffle along in that sort of graveyard until the end of time.
I don't know. I've seen, well, yes, true, but I've seen in the last couple of days, like just like with the recent pump, like FTX, like
people, these coins never die, right? These shit coins, they never die. Somebody's out there trading like Potcoin or whatever from 2014.
It's just interesting. Like, of course, like they will never hit that big peak that they hit again, but it's like to just see.
That's almost like almost like a bit of a cool side effect of the decentralization, that like something. Even though it's dead, it can't actually be shut down.
Yeah.
That's neat.
Well, I think it also speaks to like, I don't know, there's so much obsession with like utility in like all these coins, and like, you know, the utility, I think like when you see like FTX's coin pumping right now, it's like, it's casino. Like that's the utility.
I mean, you have all these like
like
serious
gambling.
coins that are doing like crazy, like Web3, like decentralized quantum, whatever.
Yeah.
And then they're like 20 on coin market cap below 5 dog themed meme coins.
Exactly. Like sometimes it's just about the meme.
Yeah. So let's get like, so Diba is using primarily RGB and Bitcoin. So, but let's get into like RGB, like, because I think it's really hard to understand. I sort of think I understand how RGB works after like a lot of digging, but I'd sort of like to hear it from someone else, and so that I can ask questions, so that I can understand it better. So first off, like, what is RGB? What are the problems that RGB is trying to solve?
Yeah, so first of all, RGB stands for Ruth Gator Binsberg. No, it stands for
Freedom and justice.
My cat's
Ruth
name is
Bader
also
Ginsburg is a scaly then?
Yeah, exactly. My cat's name is Root Beer Guy, so RBG. So he's Root Guy Beer as RGB.
No, it actually it does stand for something. It stands for really good for Bitcoin, but it's also a reference to colored coins, and it's essentially like a way to color coins using client-side validation.
And so by color coins, you mean
Create an alternate unit of account.
Right, and issuing assets on Bitcoin.
That's another way to put it.
Yep.
Issuing assets. I mean, I will say it's more like a bearer rights instrument.
A what?
A bearer rights, like BEARER.
Bearer.
Bearer rights.
Yeah.
Yeah, but before we
Bearer,
talk about RGB, I think it's always good to give shout out to Dr. Maxim Orlovsky.
No doubt.
The guy behind RGB. The guy's like a real magician, right? I think like RGB is like so complex. One of the most complex things I've seen, you know, and you know, it's just a lot of work and dedication and lots of pain that has gone to building RGB.
Yeah,
like, you know what it is, you know.
Yeah, I look at I sometimes I look at Maxime on GitHub, and like the dude writes a lot of code. Dude writes a lot of code and like a lot of specs.
He will sling Rust like nobody's business. Like I've seen him write millions of lines of code and then tear it all down and then write a million more.
Damn.
Like he and this is Rust, right? Like this is not a trivial language to write in. He's like he literally re-implemented, you know, Rust Bitcoin. He re-implemented that entirely and then added tap leaf support for like tap descriptors stuff that I couldn't even articulate. And we needed that in order to correctly tweak the taproot address outputs, and then also like verify that those are the addresses that verify that those actually commit to that, they have a cryptographic commitment to the contract state that is anchored to them.
Yeah.
I'm getting a little ahead of it.
So yeah. So RGB doesn't just do colored coins.
It does,
right?
Contracts.
It can do smart contracts.
Yeah, it's pretty much Turing complete.
Yeah,
Turing
right.
complete is a mini-stick smart contract. Yeah, which is, I think it's, let me leave this
quite
for
impressive.
Yeah.
And so RGB is also designed to work with Lightning. So you can essentially have state channels where you can, with Lightning style scalability and Lightning style finality, do these sort of, not necessarily microtransactions, but do these off-chain transactions that can be done much more frequently than on-chain Bitcoin transactions.
Yeah, no doubt.
And so, okay, so that's kind of what RGB is trying to do. So let's talk about like, how does RGB work? Explain it to me.
Yeah. So, God. So I think one place to start is like UTXOs and how a contract is anchored to them. And a UTXO in the context of RGB is used as like a sort of single-use seal.
So a single-use seal is a concept that was developed by Peter Todd in 2017, I think. I think it's 16. Oh yeah, I was just looking at I think the Bitcoin dev post. So he probably developed it before then, and I think he talked about it on Twitter a little bit. It's the concept of it's sort of hard to understand, but the idea is that it's basically a way of doing a state transition. So on Bitcoin, you have the sequence of state transitions, which is each block. Each block is a new state transition. And a single use seal is any sort of primitive that has one unique verifiable state transition. You guarantee that it goes from one state to another state. And so you can build up a chain of these state transitions. And there are sort of many different possible implementations of a single use seal, which is, I think, part of what makes it a complicated concept to understand. Like, there is no one single use seal that can be explained in concrete terms, but there's multiple implementations of a single use seal. And in this context, the implementation that RGB uses is Bitcoin transaction outputs as single use seals. And the way that you can use transaction outputs as a single use seal is, that they're only spent in exactly one way on chain. You see a Bitcoin transaction output, and then when it gets spent by a single transaction. There can't be like multiple sealings of that single use seal. It goes to one transaction, and that is a state transition.
I'm sorry. And
also
my pause.
And then also there, another key thing is that there's only one UTXO like out point that could be spent when you refer to it by its hash, the transaction hash, and its V out, right?
Right.
So like the out point, and so like there's like, it's very unambiguous what you're referring to when you're creating a cryptographic commitment, and that's very important for non-repudiation.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. And so, but we just went into a bunch of jargon.
I was going to say, I have a question that's a little bit more like broad, non-technical. I don't know if you guys want to keep going on technical, though. I don't need
we can go back to technical.
Yeah, we can go back to technical. I'm sure it will come up naturally. Like, so I guess one of the things, obviously, we're not explicitly an ordinals podcast, but we do have the ordinals guy, and you are wearing an ordinals hat now. I'm just wondering, like, how did you guys feel when ordinals came out? And then
this is really, I thought we were going to do a little detour and then
no, it's a full detour. It's
okay,
a full detour. Well, I have
yeah.
multiple questions in it. Like, it's just, I think like, I like the first question was just like, how did you guys feel when ordinals came out? How do you see RGB as being different or complementary?
we gotta go back because we gotta do
Why?
the full because we're in the middle of how
You're
does
in the
RGB
middle
work.
of it, so many weeds.
Yeah, but we need to get but you guys can definitely answer those questions. But I want to continue the technical explanation until we at least sort of get to the end.
Because make me overflow my stack.
Who, him or me?
Which stack am I gonna?
Well, I mean,
if
like,
people want to follow it, then like they need to go. We can't just go off. And
I feel like the thing that I have trouble following is like really what I'm trying to ask is like, who is RGB for? Like, it's like, is RGB for like the super technical kind of like, oh, well, it's so complicated. There's all this like blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, like, in my experience, kind of like with ordinals, it's like, there's like this Bitcoiner audience and then there's this kind of like degen audience. And like,
I think it's for everybody actually.
Well, I think so about ordinals as well, but it's like, I'm trying to wrap my head around, like, is RGB like a, super kind of a super technical thing that's like for super technical Bitcoiner types, or is it like a degen? Because it's like an asset protocol, right? Which is like fun. Like,
I think Gideon's right in saying that Bitcoin, like RGB, is like for everyone in like the literal sense of the term, in that it makes Bitcoin scalable to the point where it can serve every human and pretty much
my grandmother
every
in Nigeria,
need that they have. Yeah,
I think like RGB and Ordinal also like have a lot of like, there's like the utility similarities, right? And to even answer your question, when Ordinals came out, how did I feel, right? It's a whole thing where I had to like go through different kinds of emotions, because before Ordinals came out, at MKC, we had like several conversations about Ordinals, right? And
yeah, so, I remember we met in the first time in ACES in San Francisco at a Bitcoin meetup.
Then in Miami.
Yeah, and we talked in ACES, and I was like, yeah, I'm trying to do like my own weird NFT thing, and Gideon was like, good luck, bro. You were much more polite about it, but you were like, it's a lot of work. Like, it's hard.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like, which is something like, working in the, I'm very happy like with the way you've been able to like work to get this and get it out, because I know it must have been very, very hard, then before it came out, right? it's a whole thing. And I mean, I've come to see like the work that you did to show that like, hey, the market really wants utilities on Bitcoin, whether we like it or not. The world doesn't really care. The market decides, right?
But what do you mean even by utility? Like this is, and I think this is why I was trying to anchor it in the ordinals conversation, because I know that like at least people that watch this podcast have a semi-technical understanding of ordinals. And I think like, if you're coming at it as a non-technical person, it's like, okay, like what even is a smart contract? Why do smart contracts matter? What is utility? Like, what is it that the market is even like, you know what I mean? Like,
okay, the only thing
zooming out.
The only thing I would say is that, like, let's imagine that we are moving, like, for one thing that for sure is that we're all moving into a digital future, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's something that is inevitable. And in that digital future, we also need to have digital ownership, right? Digital ownership of stocks, digital ownership of like, art. So essentially, like things like RGB and ordinals and runes will help bring ownership.
Exactly. And so, like, do we want a digital ownership model that's based in a government database, or do we want a digital ownership model that is cryptographically secured by Bitcoin?
Censorship resistant.
Yeah, exactly.
And private and secure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
exactly.
But
like I think it's better we go back to the conversation, the earlier conversations that we have. Sorry that
I am trying to frame it big picture.
One thing I do want to say is I have a different answer to your question about like how I felt about ordinals. When I first saw it, like, first of all, I didn't quite understand what I was looking at, but that's just about everything that I see when I first see it.
Of course, and for most people, that's
But then I played with it on Signet, and I was like, oh wow, I can inscribe stuff. And a little bit before that, I actually like I looked at what Casey was putting together with ordinal theory, and like I came to the realization that like, Casey, like you think about Bitcoin a lot, like in a very deep level.
Do you have a girlfriend?
like you have. This is a guy who has like a deep respect and almost love for the concept of Bitcoin.
I do love Bitcoin, and I do think about it a lot.
And I could just tell that from the like what you went and did with the ordinals index. Like all that you did. And also I saw you built it in Rust, which made me realize like you were a serious builder, and I respected the hell out of that. And then I saw you put together the inscriptions. I was like, that's neat. And once I kind of figured them out, and then when you went to mainnet, I made several early inscriptions.
Nice.
Yeah, like sub 1K, and I did not make a lot of money off of this.
Made some good money.
It's very sad, very unfortunate. All lost in a boating accident.
Many such cases.
Yeah, but that said, that was cool as heck, and it took me like a lot longer to realize maybe this does compete with RGB. But even then, like I was still like contributing to the ordinals code base. I was like, if anybody has uploaded an MP4 to
that's right,
or has benefited from the concept of their video looping in an autoplay, then you have me to thank.
So back to RGB, back to the weeds. Sorry, Aaron.
To the weeds.
So it's based on the concept of single-use seals, embodied in using Bitcoin transaction outputs as a series of state transitions. So the RGB state is like the sequence of the state. Each new state is an output getting spent and a new output getting created. Is that sort of a fair summary?
Yes, that is the like the line in the sand drawn between each state transition.
Right.
Exactly. And that essentially tells the client side validated protocol to that the state has changed, and it needs to look for new data.
Right.
And the way it gets that new data is through what's called a consignment. And a consignment is essentially like how like it's a contract that allows you to sign over property, and like so this is like very much a bearer rights like system, and it's kind of inspired by the concept of bearer contracts, like kind of the same contracts used by the Dutch East India Company, the most successful company in the world, that, you know, they if you had it in your possession, then you were the one who, you know, held control over it. And that's a powerful concept in sovereignty, self-sovereignty, and, you know, digital self-sovereignty. Like, if we can replicate this concept, then we have, you know, a very powerful tool for rebuilding like all the things that we make use of in our modern day way of life, just built on Bitcoin. And like, I think a good example of this would be like receipts. Like, we don't actually think about receipts much, and like the concept of receipts for when we make a payment. But like like you could, you know, store the receipt in a database. That's kind of what BTC Pay Server does. Or you can get the receipt in like an atomic fashion using like an atomic swap, essentially, between the Bitcoin payment and like an output spending the RGB encumbered receipt. Mm-hmm. And so UTXO. And so you get the receipt in the same transaction that you give the money in. And so that I think is like a fantastic use case for just like, you know, like high value like transactions, and just like it gives you like kind of like illustrates some of the utility of RGB. Because like, you know, like people, it is absolutely an overused nebulous term, but like like there is very much, in my opinion, real, like when I finally understood what NFTs were, like it took me a long time to understand like their potential use cases. And like when somebody, I think it was my good friend Bruce, he explained them as just like a receipt for a JPEG, and I was like, oh, well, wait, could we use them as receipts for other things? And then I saw OpenOrdex, and OpenOrdex is like a very cool project, and it works really great. And like when it had instructions that were basically Bitcoin Core commands, I was like, oh, I know this. It's Bitcoin Core. I know this. And so it made sense to me. And then I saw what transactions it was making, and I was like, oh, that's what a Bitcoin atomic swap looks like. And so like that got me thinking like, okay, well, now we can use this for receipts. And like that then led us towards the swaps framework that we use at DIBA today. Mm-hmm. And we have a very sophisticated swaps framework we've been building, and we use them for auctions. We use them for all sorts of different like complicated models. Royalties. But oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
So how does an RGB transaction commit to the state, the contract state?
Yeah, so it keeps this data, this client-side validated data, off, like often in what's called we use two different terms for it, a stash and a stock. And the stash is where we put the contract data. And then when we go to serialize it using strict encoding, which is like this deterministic encoding that was very rigorously developed so that it's like the exact opposite of JSON. Like it has, like it's very strongly typed and has like, I would say, at least a dozen different kinds of integers, maybe even 24. And yeah, it's like on that level. And so it's an incredible system developed by Maxime, and it's great for saving bytes and encoding bytes and just doing great things with bytes in a really like clever, deterministic, reliable way in every platform imaginable, including WebAssembly, which is notorious for being just like kind of a pain in the dick to work in. But like it's anyway, once you take this dash and encode it into strict encoding in memory, then it becomes a stock, and then you can then take that and persist it using however you like, either as a file. But what we do is we take that data and we run it through Carbonado encoding, and then we save that as a file on our servers. Carbonado is end-to-end encrypted, like storage format that we can go into later, but we make extensive use of it here at DIBA for storing that contract data. And so this is off-chain data that's like kind of like just kind of like it's this dash data, that's this contract data. It's kind of kept there, and it evolves over time as you get more consignments, as you accept more consignments from people you do business with in the course of transacting with your contracts. And each contract has different fields in it. There's a schema and interface. It's kind of like similar to the object-oriented paradigm, where like you can define different fields and methods for working over that data, and these are then loaded not as part of like code that's necessarily like part of the wallet, but like they can be provided as part of the contract. And so that makes it a very versatile like protocol for executing contracts of just about any kind you might want to build.
Well, but sort of before we go into those details,
like any kind, but yeah,
I want to get into like the real specifics, because I think this is what people have trouble with when they understanding RGB. It's just the very like specific details. So you have this contract state, or like RGB state, or like asset state, and that is specific to each different contract, right? There's not like a global state.
Well,
okay. Well, then wait. Then let's leave that for a second. Okay. But this state is pointed to by Bitcoin transactions. How does the pointing work? How does a Bitcoin UTXO point to a piece of state?
It's the opposite.
Yeah.
It's a contract is anchored to a UTXO. So a UTXO can be existing in advance, and you can anchor to it in a contract without needing to do any on-chain activity at all.
Okay, well then in that case, let's get into how exactly that works. So you have a UTXO to which a contract is currently anchored to. How does a contract anchor to a UTXO?
Well, so it'll have like essentially like it'll have a field that has what's called an owned right, and an owned right is different than a global state actually, because it can be owned by an individual UTXO and then spent and changed, whereas global state in RGB is just global to the contract, but it's also defined in advance generally in the contract, though technically it can, if you build the methods for it, you can also mutate the global state, so long as you can come up with consensus as to what the global state is later on. But RGB20 and RGB21, for example, those are the fungible and non-fungible token contracts. They don't have methods to alter the global state. So we just kind of consider global state to be immutable, at least in those contexts. And those will be fields that define the ticker, the name, the description, just different, supply, there's precision, things like that. And then when you have like things like a transfer operation, I think we just call it an operation. When you do a transfer, you'll mutate an owned right with kind of like a beneficiaries allocations, like B tree map. And so like it's like this data structure that holds an accounts model inside the contract, and you can either know that there's some supply and it's anchored to UTXOs you know about, or it could also be some supply that is anchored to UTXOs that like you kind of know about, but you don't know the actual exact UTXOs. You just kind of know that it exists.
So maybe it'd be good to like do sort of like a kind of simple like worked example. So if I want to issue a token like Casey Coin using RGB, what kind of transaction do I make to create that token in the first place?
I mean, there is no transaction actually. So you are just essentially signing a cryptographic proof to like, come to anchor the contract to a piece of existing UTXO.
Right.
So essentially, let's say everybody who has Bitcoin has a Bitcoin wallet. Let's say we have like maybe 100 million Bitcoin wallets. All of us can create 10 assets all at the same time, or 100 assets all at the same time. And it does not in any way affect the Bitcoin blockchain.
So I create this contract, and then in the contract, like, or sort of this like state object that describes the token, and then in that state object, it contains an out point, right?
A field that says that at this out point, there's a certain allocation of 1,000 KC coin.
Let's say the entire allocation of KC coins is going to this one particular output.
Right. When you first issue it, that is the case.
And then presumably this is an out point that I hold, that I'm like sort of designated for the purpose of.
Exactly. So you're basically coloring a UTXO.
Right. And then there hasn't been any on-chain activity yet, right? I'm just sort of like saying like, hey, here's this contract, and this is the UTXO that currently holds the state. So then when I want to do a state update, like let's say I want to transfer half the supply to Aaron, what kind of transaction do I make?
Well, no, that's the complicated part.
Single use CLOs and all the things that single use CLOs. I mean, you know that also like RGB by default it's like has like the ZK, right? Zero knowledge, right? So essentially nobody really knows who I'm sending assets to. So all my transactions are completely confidential, right? And so I think that is like,
well, they're confidential looking forward, but not in retrospect.
Well,
like,
so they're
well, but wait. This zero knowledge stuff. This is again like this is a complexity. We should just ignore it for now.
Yeah, I don't think we should ignore it. I think it's helpful information.
It's definitely helpful information, but ignore it for now because I think it's really useful to just get through the sort of just the very specifics of the basics of how it works, and then kind of deal with these other things on top of it. So I want to transfer half of KC Coin to Aaron. I have this UTXO that the initial contract state is anchored to. What kind of transaction do I make?
Yes, so you create a new transaction that, so this is a lot. So we have this concept of a deterministic Bitcoin commitment, a DBC, and it's a hash of the state transition.
Okay.
And does the state transition also include the hash of the previous state?
Of course. Okay. Yeah.
And it definitely depends on that. And I shouldn't say of course. It does. And so it shouldn't be. A lot of these things aren't obvious, in fact. So the let's see here. Oh yeah, so we have the deterministic Bitcoin commitment, and we embed this in an op return, and this op return then goes into a tap leaf in a script path spend, and then we only ever use the key path spends.
I see.
Yeah, and so
okay, so you have your Taproot outputs can be spent in two ways. They can be spent with a key path, which just requires a simple Schnorr signature, or you can create a sort of this tap tree of many different potential scripts, any of which. So I make a transaction that spends the UTXO that the contract state points to, and then in that transaction it has an output, and it has a tap tree that consists of a single script. Like there's just a single script in that tap tree.
At the moment, yes. That there's a single script with an op return that has the DBC in it.
So, and it's an op return in a tap tree. It's not actually revealed on chain.
Correct, but you get a cryptographic commitment to it because it tweaks like all the way up to the Merkle root of the tap
whatever.
Yeah,
the output, the tap root output.
Yeah.
So, or the witness program.
Well, yeah. Oh, they call it the script pub spend or the script key or shit. I forget.
It has some
script
name.
sig, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it's the witness program. It's
the witness protection program.
That's right. I mean, there's some zero knowledge in here, so there's some witness protection.
Oh shit, we should have called it that.
So wait. So this, just to be clear, it's an opreturn, meaning that it uses the opreturn opcode. So this script path does not represent a way that the transaction or the way that this new output can be spent, but it's in a tap tree, and so you're using the key path spend, and so this tap tree leaf is not revealed on chain in that transaction that I create, and so that that contract state that tap leaf commits to, I'm creating the new state of the contract, pointing back to the previous state, and spending it. So that's how we accomplish a state transition
using a deterministic Bitcoin commitment. But then there's also the concept of a multi-protocol commitment, and so then we have
I think is this like we might want to again wait for a second to get to this because I just want to get through the simple single party example, because it's really complicated. So I think the really interesting thing here is that unlike, for example, other colored coin implementations where the contract state or the assets go from the inputs to the outputs. Instead, this new state that we're committing to when we create this transaction, that can point to any output, including an output of the current transaction.
That is completely unrelated.
Right.
And it could also be a witness, like a witness transfer. So you'll do this with your change, for example, your token change, where you'll assign it to the first taproot. Taproot was like that, the DBC. You'll assign it to the first output of that transaction, and it'll be a new transaction that you make. And so we call this the witness, because you actually don't know the actual transaction ID when you go ahead and commit to that.
So it can commit to an output of the one transaction that I made?
When you make a transfer transaction, you'll want to create a new output to to commit to your token change to it. So
but in the I have the initial state, I make one transaction, that transaction commits to the new token state. Can I
you can then specify multiple beneficiaries.
Right. But can those beneficiaries be outputs of that transaction?
So no, because you need to have separate Dust UTXOs to represent different accounts, kind of.
But can I create multiple outputs in that transaction and commit to those? Can I?
You can create them, but you can't commit to them because it's not deterministic if you do that.
It's because there's a circular hash reference problem. The hash of the transaction which you're committing to, the output contains the hash of the transaction. The hash of the transaction depends on the outputs. The outputs can contain the opreturn, which is committing to.
Right, and so we have this very specific thing called a taproot first commitment, where it has to be the first out point in the UTXO that we're committing to.
Oh, I see. So in that special case, it essentially says the output that I'm anchoring the new state to is the current transaction's first output.
Yes. Otherwise, it's not verifiable from a client-side validation standpoint.
And can I commit to multiple outputs of the same transaction, to say the first output and the second output? My sending half the coins to Aaron and then half the coins back to myself.
So you can commit to multiple outputs in separate transactions.
Okay.
So you can send it to Aaron's Dust UTXO. You can send it to a number of different individuals who want this airdrop or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And you can do, as Pretty much, as far as I know, as many as you care to. I don't think there's a limit. I don't know of a limit if there is.
Doesn't this isn't there a potential usability problem here in that Erin, if she wants to receive coins from me or Casey coins or whatever, she has to already have an output in her wallet in order to receive the coins.
No doubt. And we have to explain this to our users a lot. And I have to I even just handed Gideon just today an explainer for this concept. I have a really good name for it, but the best we could come up with was Fund Vault, and it basically funds this token vault with Dust UTXOs. And hopefully, by providing the transaction ID and a link to the mempool explorer, people can see oh yes, we created these Dust UTXOs for them of these varying amounts that we don't want to all have the same Dust UTXO amounts But these are kind of sus transactions in that they're two inputs actually usually one input and three outputs. They look almost like a pitchfork, but they kind of look unusual at chain analysis. But we try to at least vary the dust outputs, and then and then of course their change goes back to their wallet.
Got it. Is there potentially a race condition where if I'm assigning the new token state to an output that Erin has that's been created beforehand, that's previously existing, that if she doesn't see my transaction assigning the tokens to her UTXO, she can spend that UTXO and she wouldn't commit to the right state output, and then she would essentially lose the coins.
They would be unspendable, yeah.
Got it.
And so that's something that we are solving at DEBA by essentially having basically the capability for the wallet to tell basically our servers where your Dust UTXO is, your current one is, and that way somebody can take your username and send you tokens by your username.
I see. Is that a privacy leak?
In some ways, yeah. But that said, actually no, because
we're using Carbonado, right?
Well, no, not just that, but also they're blinded UTXOs.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I see. So the UTXOs, you add a random blinding factor.
Yeah.
Right. I see. Got it. Let's see. That's super interesting. So and then Erin, now her UTXO, I do this transaction off to the side, and now the new part of the new contract state has been now assigned to Erin's UTXO that she has in her wallet. And she can do a new transaction which does whatever that she's allowed to do with that state. In this case, transfer tokens up to the amount that I've... So I think this is actually one of the most fascinating things about RGB is that it doesn't... if you look at the on-chain transaction graph that you get from just following Bitcoin inputs and outputs, in Bitcoin itself... and in a lot of protocols built on top of Bitcoin, like Lightning, like Taproot assets, the on-chain transaction graph is the same transaction graph as these other protocols, right? If you want to, Lightning, it does all these off-chain transactions, but ultimately settles on-chain. Although Lightning does obscure it a little bit because the on-chain transactions are not the senders and the recipients. Let's take ordinals as an example to pick on. Sure, yeah, runes, whatever. The on-chain transaction graph of on-chain Bitcoin transactions that you can follow from input to output, that is the same transaction graph that ordinals or runes uses. You can look at the on-chain transactions and it's the same...
the addresses they get. And,
the same chain analysis techniques that you would use for tracing Bitcoin in chain, ordinals and runes is also susceptible to. Right. But RGB actually has a completely different transaction graph because when I want to do a state update, the new state doesn't flow from an input to an output. It flows from an input to a completely unrelated output on chain, essentially. Yeah.
And I do have to take a minute to reflect on the fact that it's just been so cleverly designed. A ton of thought has been put into this thing over the course of over half a decade, and work too. And it's actually it's coming on almost to a decade's worth of work, and it's like, for example, like the thing that reminded me of like to appreciate that again is the fact that like we almost designed a system that like would like be something that would compromise our users' privacy, but fortunately the people who designed RGB thought, oh, actually it would be better to blind the UTXO.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it just I don't know, it's just there's just a bunch of forethought that went into this, designing these systems that like we benefit a great deal from. And I think there was something you mentioned in one of your earlier podcasts about abstractions,
mm-hmm.
and just like there are definitely parts of RGB where I will draw a line and I'll be like, there are things I'm not sure I will understand here. And and you know, like it's very difficult to like hold it all in your head all at once also, but or like I don't know how Maxime does it. Actually, he doesn't.
He probably has to read his own code sometimes.
I've worked closely with
to
him,
remind himself.
Yes, and he'll be like, oh yeah, that's right, that's how that works. Yeah, that's how I wrote it.
So you were mentioning before that it uses zero knowledge proofs. Where in the protocol does it use zero knowledge proofs?
Yeah, so one place it uses them is Peterson commitments. Are you familiar with those?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Nice. So for those who aren't familiar with Peterson commitments, they're basically a way to like add up and subtract numbers and make sure that they're like when you commit to them that they add up to zero.
Yeah, it's a form of homomorphic commitment. A homomorphic commitment is just a way of hiding values, sort of encrypting values, such that you can still do useful operations on them without knowing those values. So in the case of Peterson commitments, it's a way of having essentially integers, just numbers that are encrypted. So they all just look like 256 bits of nonsense, but you can add them together and you can add two Peterson commitments, two numbers that you have no idea what they are, get a third number, which is the sum, that you also don't know what they are. And so this is used, for example, in GRIN, Mimblewimble type protocols, such that a third party can validate a transaction and know that all the inputs sum to all the outputs without actually knowing what those input-output values are. That's
actually called Mimblewimble.
Yeah, it's actually called Mimblewimble.
Sounds like a cat, right?
Yeah.
No, it's something out of Harry Potter, I think.
Yeah. So where is Peterson commitments the only type of zero knowledge proof that's used in?
No, we use bullet proofs to kind of like make the Peterson commitments work.
Yeah, Peterson commitments, they can only they can commit to that the sum of two numbers or a few numbers is a particular value, but that value can wrap. It has a maximum value, and if you sum two numbers that the sum of those two numbers is greater than the maximum value, it can wrap around to a small number, right? So you could create, like, let's say the maximum is 255. You create one input with 10 and another, or like one input with whatever. I'm not going to do the example because I'm going to get it wrong. Yeah. But you can essentially wrap the numbers. And so you need bullet proofs to make sure that that all of the numbers are in range. All of the Peterson commitments are below a maximum. And so they can't cause the sum of those numbers to wrap.
And this is all just to prevent supply inflation.
And so this all...
or double spend.
So this means that the output amounts in a contract are blinded. So if you're a party to a contract, let's say we're doing this transfer. Can Erin tell what the total supply of the coin is?
Yes.
And she can't tell how much you have. She cannot know how much you have.
Right. Well, presumably if this is the first transfer, she can figure out that I have the rest. Yeah. But let's say I'm doing two transfers at once to Erin, Gideon, and change back to me. She knows that she knows how much she's getting, but she doesn't know what the split is between me and Gideon. Yeah. Essentially. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. And then one interesting consequence of the kind of privacy model of RGB is that it gives you correct me, like I don't exactly understand the right way to think about this, but it gives you like forward privacy, like, or I shouldn't use the term forward because that's a technical term. It gives you
forward secrecy.
Yeah, the contract state that sort of branches off from your contract state, like transfers to other people, and those transactions going forward, you don't know what those are. So if I participate in this transaction with Aaron and Gideon, I'm transferring to Gideon, I'm transferring to Aaron. Now Aaron and Gideon can have their own tree of state transitions where they transfer to other people. And if those state transition trees don't intersect, they won't see what's in each other's trees. So any transfers that Gideon makes in the future, Aaron can't follow those state updates in the future. So she won't be privy to anything that happens on that side, and then same on the other side.
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
There is, once you are party to a transaction, then you can look back through the series of state updates, and then you can kind of learn about transactions like retroactively, essentially.
Yeah, and there's two ways to solve for that. One is, like, for example, in the case of, say, Tether, you might take your, like, dirty, crusted contract Tether and then, like, that's been around for a while, and then, like, say, I want fresh new notes, and like you can swap those
right
with Tether. And there's another way to handle it, of course, is with zero knowledge proofs, and there's like a bulletproofs plus library that Blockstream is working on that we're kind of just waiting for that to be built. And in the meantime, we just have zeros in the field where we expect that data to go. But essentially, we're planning. We have already designed the system in a way that we expect that problem to be solved through zero knowledge proofs.
So,
and that's also a criticism people often had of RGB, is that, like, we're waiting for everything to be perfect in order to build it, and that's absolutely not the case. We've been building, like, iterating it and, like, doing absolutely not the perfect from the get-go.
Yeah.
And so
I need to get to the bottom of this. That's
I know,
the deal. I need to get to the bottom of this.
Okay, Casey, are you a dictator?
Yeah.
No, just for my own
understanding,
for my own edification.
Yeah,
And I also think that it's a very useful explanation if we get from the beginning to the end to all those people who, maybe are a little bit more technical, who want a step by step.
And to the viewers, we took a break, and I complained that I wanted to zoom out again, and we're gonna zoom out.
Overruled, but we're gonna zoom out.
But not
later.
yet.
I agree with.
But we'll timestamp it, or I'll splash things together in a way that makes it make sense.
Yeah.
So Casey's gonna finish his line of inquiry.
Okay, so
Actually, Casey, I would prefer if you would put your hands back.
Okay, I'll do that for you.
Thank you.
Yep. So,
in the pause.
Okay. Yeah. So, smart contracts. Okay. So this is kind of interesting. How does RGB, what language are RGB smart contracts written in? Or let me be more specific. If they're compiled from one language to another, what's actually in the contract commitment?
So like, there's that interface and schema that we talked about, and I'm trying to remember the interface. Okay, yeah, the schema, the interface. Right. One of them contains the implementation, the interface implementation, I think it is, and then there's the schema that, like, kind of defines, like, how the data is laid out in memory, and like that's all kind of wired together by configuration almost. You can use YAML if you wanted to kind of program a smart contract. And that said, there's also a language in development right now called Contractum that could also do that for you.
And so when you write Contractum, what does it compile down to?
The same thing. It's like this schema and interface, like bytecode.
So the interface implementation is a form of bytecode. like for a VM that's defined.
Well, the
I mean,
implementation.
there's also Alu VM, right?
Well,
Which,
the implementation is actually that is in Rust. Like you will like make Rust calls to like things like bulletproofs and Peterson commitments and things like that, using like calls to specific methods. But like that would be according to like it still remains to be seen like the degree of extensibility we can achieve. I think it can get even more expressive and stuff, but we're still just kind of in the middle of like just getting everything to work in a satisfying way. But like it can absolutely, there's definitely room for improvement. But
so when I do this state transition that sends coins to Aaron, my original Casey coin contract has some sort of program that Aaron is going to need to run to do the client side validation.
Well, it'll specify like what's an owned right, what's a global state, what's what's owned state, what's a global state. Then there's also like just different fields and their types and then what operations can occur, and then those operations then go over, like get caught by an interface implementation, and that would be in Rust.
Well, but like her computer has to run, presumably, if I'm understanding how the capabilities of RGB
on the phone.
It has to, but it has to run some code, right?
Well, yeah, it's all in the wallet.
Right. Like it has to run that smart contract to make sure that the conditions of the smart contract were adhered to, essentially.
Yes.
So is that some sort of virtual machine that's defined?
Well, so there is a thing called ALUVM but it's not really used in this way. So ALUVM, what it'll do is it'll have access to a whole bunch of interesting stuff that you can look at on chain and just like in the contract and maybe even other contracts, and you can then decide. All it needs to return is a yes or no. Can this be spent or not? And is this valid or not, or whatever it is. But yeah, it's basically like this bytecode that executes in a VM that like gets to look at like all the intrinsics and like all data intrinsic to the contracts and the blockchain and whatever it can get access to in a deterministic manner, that it can then just kind of like flip a bit, say yes or no.
And that's what Aaron has to run this ALUVM program to verify that state transition and all previous state transitions.
If it's included, but none of the current RGB protocols, as far as I know, implement an ALUVM script.
I see. So like something like a RGB20 and RGB21, which are the fungible and non-fungible token standards, those are more like declarative.
Right.
And they just declare like essentially what you're allowed to do up front. These are the rights, you're allowed to do with them as you will.
Exactly.
And you don't actually have to run a program.
Right.
Yeah, that's actually really nice. I mean, one thing that is not great about ERC 721 tokens is that each one can have its own bespoke implementation that isn't declarative, that you have to audit the smart contract to figure out, can new tokens be created? Is there a hard limit? Is there an admin backdoor? Is there a security problem? But presumably all RGB21 tokens are sort of the same in terms of they can have this list of rights, and you don't need to run code, quote unquote, on each transfer. You just need to see, okay, Aaron had the right to 10,000 tokens and she sent 7,000, 1,000, and 2,000. And she's allowed to do that according to that right. And it's not like executing a program.
I think that is a very accurate way to put it.
Got it. Awesome. So ALUVM sort of opens up the door to like Turing complete smart contracts. Yeah. But is that's sort of a planned feature, or is it implemented yet?
Oh, it is implemented. I just don't know people using it.
Okay.
I think like it's gonna be much more of a second order effect, right? Because like as more people are getting to like use RGB, then later people are gonna be like, in case you can like create your own schema and then like do some interesting things with it. Like when it comes to the Bitcoin finance that Maxim has been talking about, right? I think that's where like the AluVM, I think that's what he calls it, will shine.
I mean, one thing is I actually think that probably 90 or 95+% of use cases are covered by these sort of simple declarative ownership rights. Like that's what people.
That's what we really want now.
Yeah.
It's a lot of what people want, you know. So those simple things cover it. So let's see other things that I think are interesting. Yeah. So you can so there's also ALUVM if you want to have sort of more complicated conditions. Actually, I should just turn the lights on.
And actually, I just remembered, it's supposed to be pronounced AluVM.
AluVM, yeah. Maxim calls it AluVM, yeah. Yes, AluVM, like, I mean, I think, like, the RGB is, like, so, it's, like, for me, it's, like, you know, learning more about Bitcoin. Every day you learn more about RGB. It's, like, it seems like there's just something new that, like, you didn't know you could, like, implement in a specific way.
Well, I think that's also, you know, what I was kind of trying to get at with my question about, you know, who is RGB for, or like who do you think would be interested in this? Because I think one of the things that I notice with, you know, I think Bitcoiners, this is a problem for Bitcoiners, definitely a problem for crypto, whatever, is like, you know, if you really believe in this like full adoption future where like everyone, like your grandmother in Nigeria, is interested in the thing that you're into, whether that's Bitcoin, RGB, Ethereum, whatever, that person is going to want to interact with it on an extremely like removed, non-technical level, right? And like, you know, things like smart contracts or these sort of more like complicated use cases. It's like, to me, the target audience for that is kind of people that are already sort of into crypto in some way, or they're technical, or they're interested. And maybe I'm like oversimplifying in the sense that like maybe there's a way to make those things more user friendly that people would care. But
can I take this, please?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you know, Irene, you're very right? Because like what we really need in this world is how do we, like in crypto. So I've been in crypto for a long time, and I've seen that like most projects made money by making things complex, right? They make things complex so that only a few people can understand it. Before, you know, the world starts understanding what's going on, then, you know, they cash out, everything goes to zero. And, you know, again, complexity is also important if you're building something that's never been built, right? But then the idea is how do you simplify the complexity so that it's very simple, so that my grandmother in Nigeria can actually get to understand it and use it, right? And so like the way I see RGB is that it takes the natural world based on the laws of physics, simplifies it, and, you know, takes it up into like the digital world, right? For example, let's look at cash, right? When I have cash, I can give you cash, I can give you $100, in case you might not know how much I gave you, but you can give him 10, right? And then it's still 10, it's still consistent, right? And so that's how like RGB works in that sense, right? And then with like client-side validation, right? Client-side validation against Bitcoin, it's like something that's just super cool because like we can do things, we can have our connect. Like let's say, you know, you have, I see like this art on this wall, right? It's here, we know it's there, right? But not, you know, not those online that know that the art is here, right? And so people are able to like have ownership of things and kind of like prevent the whole world from knowing it, right? And so it's like these are like just simple examples of how RGB like gets to do that. And who is the users of RGB, right? Since like, I mean, Maxim is the main developer of RGB. Our team is contributing as, you know, supporting with like team and other things. But then like one thing that we've really done very well is being able to like simplify RGB for the average person to use. Like the other day, I can't tell you how much like users that we have now, but like it's crazy. Like testing the wallet, like over 400,000 wallets being tested. Wow. Like, and so who are these people? I can't tell you, but then they have a reason for coming to check these things out, right? And so it's more like building on like all these cool things that people will get to use, and they'll figure out why they're using it. And how do we make it so simple? Like if it's not so simple enough for my grandmother, I will quit. Like that's how I think about it, right? Yeah. So it's like, how do we like bring it down to that place? Hunter, you want to add something? Cool.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that like I want to maybe clarify. I don't really think of RGB contracts as being similar to cash in one respect, in that like when you consign a contract to someone else, It's like you make a photocopy of the contract, and then you put your signature on the bottom of it, and they put their signature on the bottom of it, and they have now this bearer contract, and you have this bearer contract, and there's like this history of signatures written on the back of it, and so like there is kind of this paper trail that differentiates it a bit from say eCash, which your good friend Nobu is working on, and so I don't want to like conflate the two.
I mean, maybe I oversimplified it. I really do apologize for that. But like I mean, it's more like how do just like not just on the cash part, but like from the biology part, right? Since like the cellular automata, right? I think you can talk more about that since you did a lot of biology, right? How because like the whole body also like works through. I think the human body works through like client-side validation, where each cell can talk to each other. I kind of relay information because the cells are relaying information, right? But then it's like that's how when I think about RGB, like that's what I see. I see like kind of people being able to relay information very deterministically in a consistent manner, but without like having like to like like put it out there where my cell is like relaying some information and your cell knows or something like that. It's kind of like
That is crazy.
let's get back to the
there was one other thing I wanted to mention.
Go for it.
Getting back to like receipts, like these are contracts we deal with on a daily basis, and like, but they're contracts. They're like real things, and they are things that your grandmother in Nigeria would absolutely appreciate working with.
It's really interesting to think of a receipt as a contract.
Yeah.
It's essentially a receipt. A receipt is a contract that gives you like a limited return right of the object in the future, right? They say, okay, you bought this, you have 14 days to bring it back for cash.
Exactly. And so, in that respect, like I think it can make commonplace certain things. There's also a scale factor here, like that I do not want to understate, because, for example, multi-protocol commitments, there can be over 250,000 different contracts anchored to a single UTXO.
Right, and that's an interesting point. Like I can tell people that I'm interacting with about the UTXO that I have. Different people can make multiple contracts that, if I'm using the right terminology, like consign the new state of the contract to that UTXO, and all of a sudden my UTXO has all of these contracts pointing to it. And so then with one transaction of that one UTXO, I can sort of execute the next step in those contracts.
Right. So for example, in our wallet, we actually only create one dust output for RGB20 and one dust output for RGB21. And that is good for just about as many tokens as you want to.
Why do you separate the outputs for 20 and 21? Why not have a shared output?
Well, we've run into bugs sometimes. Like you're technically able to do that, but we ran into a bug where we did that. There's also a concept of velocity. So like we create a new address for every like spend, and like when you like RGB20 will have a different velocity than RGB21, and so we just want to kind of keep them separate in terms of like the address lists. And so there's a couple of reasons, but that said, I would be open to having just a single output, and I would like that because it would make the Dust funding transaction not only half the cost of what it currently is, but it would also make it appear more private. And so I do kind of like that idea, but it would be more like maybe a pleb mode kind of thing, and there's also I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but the fact that we're able to separate ownership and state, we can using RGB, we can then take the ownership model and completely simplify it just for use with single use seals, and throw out all the other stuff regarding UTXOs. And in doing so, we create an alternative layer 1 for settling RGB spends. And this would be something like Prime.
Prime?
Yeah, so Prime is like an alternate layer 1 that could be that essentially is specifically designed for closing single-use seals, and there's a interactivity like kind of aspect to it in that you need a node to be online to collect proofs from other users when they do their spends so that you can be able to spend your seals over time. And if you miss one of those proofs, you're kind of boned. So but you should be able to receive them from other miners.
So this actually kind of goes into my next question, which is we have these. You're going to continue?
There's a couple more. Like the reason I bring it up is because Prime can scale like practically unbounded, like TPS. Like
it's not a proof of work. Like what?
There's some proof of work involved in it, but like it's just to secure the protocol, and but it is like a way to like scale RGB transactions on a level that is a crazy amount.
Like, how does it work? What's the TLDR of Prime?
So it's like an alternative layer 1 that is specifically designed to work specifically for RGB, and it makes it fast. Well, maybe not faster. It makes it more like scalable. Way more scalable.
Is it a blockchain?
It has headers, but I think they do kind of avoid the concept of blocks in the traditional sense. Though that interactivity problem, like it inspired me and a friend of mine, Adam Borko, to work on a kind of like an alternative implementation of Prime, and we call that Abraxas, or at least it solves different problems than Prime. So Prime is good for for assets that you spend practically as soon as you get them, or just high velocity assets. Whereas if you want to settle an asset for a long time and not have to worry about collecting proofs in an interactive manner, then Adam and I kind of came up with a way that is a very kind of compact and concise, the most concise way we could think of and imagine to define closing a seal, which is in defining and closing a seal. Defining a seal is just saying how many seals I want to open in a block, and this is then secured by Bitcoin or Liquid, and then when actually I think we just decided not to use Liquid to secure it. We were just using Bitcoin, but then there's also, I think we should integrate a little bit of Liquid though. I think we can have a little bit of Liquid as a tree, but also like this is the problem when you're designing protocols. Like you have to make decisions, and you're just like it's just like, well, should we anyway. And if anybody has any feedback or interest into any of the Abraxas stuff, there's something called the 9th proof of folding that is on Adam Borko's GitHub, and we could really use some feedback on the issues and discussions there. But
I think Casey will love that actually.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So if I'm understanding correctly, like RGB transactions have some overhead from being Bitcoin transactions, right? They have to contain Bitcoin signatures and outputs. They commit to these things in these tap trees. Bitcoin has a limited speed at which it can create transactions. This is instead sort of like a header chain that contains the minimum amount of data needed to define and spend a single-use seal that's committed to periodically on Bitcoin. Essentially,
yes, exactly. Yeah. And in addition, so like after defining how many seals you want to open a block, in order to close the seal, you just define which block the seal was opened in, and kind of like an index into the block that is assigned to you. And so we capped it at 1 million transactions per block, and then we I I just had a total brain fart.
Counted 1 million transactions per block.
Yeah, and
we can cut that part out.
Yeah, I would hope so.
I mean, I actually think that, like, Abraxas, or I don't think it's pretty obvious. Abraxas is still, like, work in progress. Nobody's really fully working on it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But they will be, because
it's gonna be soon.
Because
after we release
like
things with RGB,
right?
Yeah,
because
gonna, focus on scaling it, because it's gonna be a problem. People need the scaling.
What is it that you're releasing? Because I keep seeing tweets being like, "Oh my God, RGB is doing something," and I have no idea what it is.
Okay.
Isn't there something coming out like soon?
Yeah, well, Bitmask, yeah,
Bitmask.
absolutely. But just to tie on Gideon's thought there, with Abraxas, like that's how we intend to scale our UDAs, because our unique digital assets are essentially NFTs. They're non-fungible. You cannot scale those with Lightning.
Yeah.
And there's no liquidity to do so. You can maybe use them with Lightning if you want, like the instant finality, but you can't really scale them with Lightning. And so, in order to scale, you need this like second alternative layer one. And so that is why DIBA has a vested interest in the development of Abraxas, and will likely be sponsoring its development in the future. The other thing is. The question was, what are we launching?
Releasing?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We're launching a bunch of cats. Well, do you know that the is it called the avatar? The avatar, or the icon for Bitmask is actually a cat.
Meow.
Nice.
Yeah. It's a cat. Yeah. And it was Hunter that came up with the concept in Miami.
Love it.
Yeah. So we're launching Bitmask 0.7 version 0.7. It's actually crazy, like how many versions we have of Bitmask since the beginning. I was looking back at like the first version, and I started laughing. It was like hilarious. Yeah. But then like we so far, like this past week, right? We woke up and then it became crazy. Like we had like maybe over 100,000 wallets in a few hours, and it's just extremely exciting to see people like coming in to really get to start using these things. I mean, we've been able to like do like transactions and things like that. So with Bitmask version 7, it's more about like, hey, come play a little bit.
And what is Bitmask?
So Bitmask is actually our flagship product, right? So when we raised our first money to build DIBA, right? Then I was like, yeah, I want to build NFTs on Bitcoin, right? And so we got some check from Team, and then I was hanging out with Team one day in the middle of the night, in the midnight, somewhere in the desert. Team tells me, Gideon, you want to like make it so easy for people to use, right? That's the key. 3 clicks, 5 maximum. I was like, okay. So I was thinking, and I was like, you know what? How come there is no like MetaMask for Bitcoin, right? And so that was where the idea of Bitmask came about. And so we started like working on how do we build this wallet that's going to make it super easy to do like all the things that MetaMask does for Ethereum, right? And then while we started like developing the idea, that was when Hunter joined, and then the whole game changed. It became very exciting. So Bitmask, essentially, you want to see Bitmask as like your all-in-one Bitcoin wallet that can do like normal Bitcoin transactions, but it's a fun wallet. So it's like a social wallet for Bitcoin ecosystem. And I think that the future we're going to have, as we have one F, and many countries and different things, we're gonna have one chain, only Bitcoin, right? And then we're gonna have multiple protocols on Bitcoin. And so we want to like end up supporting all Bitcoin protocols so that like people get
ordinals,
yeah, like not BRC20 for sure, yeah.
You, not you.
Yeah. I mean,
no. That said, like if there's market demand for it, who are we to say no? In my opinion, we need to build maximal utility.
Yes.
But that said, like I do draw the line at protocols that aren't Bitcoin. Like
yeah. But like if you bring in BRC20, the Sofon. It's gonna
the Sofon is back.
The Sofon is back. Yeah. So the Sofon comes for you, and it's gonna.
It might not even be worth bothering.
But maybe runes.
Runes definitely.
Yeah.
Runes sounds like. I mean, runes is gonna be
bullish
like
on runes.
Yeah. And because like it's also like Rust based, so it's like I think like when we started like building all of this, I'm like, wow, like we're building like tools that will eventually be used in space. Like that's how I think about it. Like, cause like you can like convert an RGB smart contract into like a photon and shoot it to space. And you can client-side validate that shit.
It's true. It's like a little like packet of information. You can when you first define the contract, you can embed like 16 megabytes of data into it, and that's the whole contract. And then when you like have state transitions, you just ship the consignments and they're added in the client side. And so it's completely asynchronous, and so it could work very well for like interplanetary purposes, at least until we meet the aliens that help us develop our quantum computers well enough.
Hunter, I consider myself to be an alien.
What's your sign?
My sign. Which kind of signs? I have many signs. I'm a man of many signs. What do you mean by sign? Like birth sign or what?
Yeah, your astrological.
So I'm actually in between a Taurus and a Gemini.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Why are you asking?
She's obsessed with astrology.
So what does that mean? Does that mean anything? I'm more of a Gemini, though, I think.
Yeah, I would say that too. Yeah.
Because I'm funny?
Well, you're verbose. You have big ideas. That's more of a Gemini trait.
Oh, okay.
Kanye's a Gemini. Trump's a Gemini.
Oh, okay.
So
thank you very much for the classification.
It helps kind of frame
what do they say about Virgos?
Virgos are very they're like perfectionist type A. They're not always. Sometimes they can kind of like they can be kind of perfectionist type A about certain things, and then they just like completely block other things out of their mind because they can't like handle being as like controlling as they'd like to be.
Hunter is smiling. So, Kizzy, what's your sign then?
Oh, Aries.
He's an Aries. Yeah.
So what is Aries?
Just like assholes.
Yeah. Yeah. Like very argumentative, very like I focused. I'm a Leo, which is like also we're both fire signs.
So you guys are just like always on fire.
Yeah. Hell Money podcast. I mean,
okay.
it's hell in here if you couldn't tell.
It's hot. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank God I'm from Africa, so I can't prepare.
Sorry, I derailed the conversation.
I have more questions.
Yeah, of course he does. He's like waiting, like, please.
RGB contract state is not on chain. So when users get a transfer of, or they're the beneficiary of a transaction consignment, they have to have a way of getting the previous consignment states all the way back to the initial consignment. How do they do that? Where does that data live?
There are so many ways that happens. So
just pick the simplest one, or the way that people do it right now.
Okay, they use a consignment relay that just like kind of keeps it on the relay, and then they get a consignment ID, and then they get it from the relay.
So the relay is a server, or anybody could run a relay, but presumably Deba, you guys run your own relay.
We actually do not. We
we're running the one from Bitfinex, right?
Yeah, we
Iris
use
Wallet. Yeah.
We use the one used by Iris Wallet.
Got it. So this is just the server that runs. When I do my transaction with Aaron, I upload the contract state to this server, and then Aaron is the recipient of this contract. Do I have to tell Aaron about the transaction? I do, because she's not party to the on-chain transaction.
Yeah. Like she has to like, not only do you have to tell her about it, but she has to accept it. She has to consent to adding it to her wallet.
I'm not sure I'm going to accept Casey Coin.
Well, she like the contract can consign itself to her UTXO. That's permissionless, right?
Yeah.
But she can ignore that consignment completely when she spends that UTXO.
Sovereignty.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, like.
So, but wait.
Yeah.
How do I tell Aaron about that she's the recipient of this contract? Is this through the relay?
Yeah. Well, so currently that would be out of band. However, we have a couple different ways we'd like to solve for that one. All of basically using Nostr in some way, shape, or form. But then
how is it done out of band? Like I just send her an email with the file attached,
or Telegram message.
Okay. So before actually the proxy, everybody has been testing on Bitmask with like sending to each other. Like people have to like that was how we became. That's how we got like so many users, right? Because like this guy created a coin called Pepe RGB.
Yeah, it
right?
sounds about right.
Classic. Yeah. Tale as old as time.
Yeah, he made Pepe RGB, and before you know what's happening, some dude in China picks up the Pepe RGB because we were doing transfers. Gideon,
Chinese people love Pepe.
How do I transfer this to you? Blah blah blah. And then he was making tweet posts. Then this dude picks it up, writes an article about RGB and Pepe RGB. Oh my God, Hunter will tell you how much he felt like everything. Like we didn't prepare for anything. We're not expecting anything. We're like getting like hundreds of thousands of users, people getting the wallets and things like that. I'm like, wow.
But this is what drives adoption, right? It's like it's Pepe's and things of that sort and that nature.
The exotic
It's dressing up as a cat girl maid for your podcast that's going to be highly technical.
Well, it's like Udi says, like never underestimate the power of degens.
Yeah,
Never.
Very much the case.
Yeah.
Okay, wait.
How did you feel though when you launched and everything just took off? Like,
It was
I
insane.
think it's like a lot of. Did you go for therapy?
No, but I should have.
We did a Hell Money podcast there.
We did the Hell Money podcast therapy episode. No, it was crazy, and a lot of it was hard because, like, I'm a perfectionist.
Yeah.
And when I like make things, like, I really want them to be perfect. If there's any bugs, I want them to be fixed. If there's any like serious features that are missing, I want to add them. Yeah. And Ord specifically is very different. It's a very large, very complicated program that has a lot of users, a lot of non-technical users. And so there's always going to be a long tail of bugs and feature requests and like performance issues. And it's just like a real mindset shift from going from something that's like a hobby project where I'm able to fix everything that needs to be fixed to something where I'm like, okay, I have to accept that this thing isn't going to be perfect. And I have to not be super stressed that there's a bunch of issues open and none of them I can't fix all of them.
Right. So that was something I had to just come to grips with today. Like we know that there are a number of places where our users will come into like contact with bugs with our 0.7 0. Release that we just pushed to beta. But the thing is, we pushed it to beta. Yeah. And that's why we push it to beta, because then we have people test it and tell us what's wrong. And then we also just very clear with the fact that anybody putting real money into this is reckless. #reckless.
But that's what the degens do.
Bless their hearts. Thank you.
Well, the other thing is that like we also need to update to like RGB version 11, which is like the main thing. Right, I think it's going to happen like in the next few days.
So RGB, the protocol as it's developed, when did it become stable? When did it become like not 10. A moving target? 10.
I think 10.
Yeah. How long ago was 10?
I would say like March, maybe earlier this.
I don't know.
At least 6 months ago.
6 months. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. So I
was gonna say how many more.
What?
Questions?
2.
Okay.
I have to use one hand for each question. I have 2 questions. Yeah. So
2 paws per question.
2 paws per question. That's right. So my first question is, how do multi-party smart contracts work on RGB?
They don't.
Okay. That's totally.
Wait. What is multi-party smart contracts, please?
Well, so what I mean is that taking an Ethereum contract as an example, I can deploy a smart contract, and then many people can interact with it. Right, many different users can interact with it.
Like the state gets sharded up, and like so multiple people can interact with it, but they're not all going to have the same shared state.
Right, and that's like I think that's an important limitation because, for example, if I deploy,
it's how it scales.
Right, it's how it scales, but also it can't do certain things. Like if you have an Ethereum DEX, you have a bunch of liquidity pools in that DEX.
And you have a bunch of MEV too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is not something that comes without caveats, right?
Yeah.
But it does mean that all users are interacting with the same liquidity pools in the same contract.
I mean, like
so just to be clear, I don't think it's an unreasonable limitation, right? And it comes with important benefits, right?
Yeah.
But so you can't do things like a DEX on RGB.
Here's one thing you can do is if your buddy has $1,000 worth of Tether and you have a certain amount of Bitcoin, and you just want to like do a swap that the government doesn't need to know about, you can absolutely do that with RGB.
Sure, but I mean, I just think it's important to recognize, like, it's just there's so much demand for these kind of on-chain multi-party.
Yeah, you are right, Casey, and I think that's like the way RGB is that I think it's pretty early to. From my own experience, like looking into RGBs before people started looking into it, I think that nobody should just like easily discount RGB, right? Like the way RGB
No,
works,
I mean, it's not discounting. And like Hunter said, like Ethereum comes along with terrible scaling and MEV where miners can reorder.
And not just that.
The miner is like, you think you're doing a transaction between two people and the miner's like, do I consent? You know?
and also the contract developer, it's like, well, we have this thing called a proxy contract that might actually rug your whole account system.
Yeah.
And so like token proxy contract. And so like and that's another thing that RGB gives you is that you can't actually just like change the rules underneath someone. That you can't change their contracts without like completely breaking the protocol. And so another thing is I want to like kind of just really freaking underscore for the Bitcoiners out there is like there's this whole freaking like attitude in the Ethereum community that will privatize the gains and socialize the losses. Like we'll socialize the costs of running a node and like having these pools and doing everything together in this community and then all together and then like in this collective, right? Whereas like RGB is very much like the exact opposite, where it's very much of a focus on a sovereign individual.
Yeah, that's very thoughtful and very, very thoughtful. Like, I mean, the way you presented that is something that I really, really love, right? Like, not socializing the cost, right? I mean, I think as they say, you kill the meat, you kill what you eat, right? So it's I think we need a system where where there are people who really need to use the tools that we are all working on, which is Bitcoin, and I think that there are also people who don't really need to use them. There are people who use them because they can, it's because of, I'm cool, I want to use this, right? Fine, right? But then there are also people who are like, if I don't use this, my life might be in jeopardy, right? And I might be in trouble, right? Because like I have a terrible government, or I have a terrible financial system, or I have nothing, right? And so I think like us figuring out ways to ensure that those people continue using Bitcoin in that way, it's really, really important. This is where like Abraxas comes to play, or other things. Like, how do we keep ensuring that, like, because like it's only when you have faced one of the good things that I think that about me that I've been able to like live in different parts of the world is that I've seen different things. I've seen different people from different perspectives, and I've really been able to understand like, hey, what do people really want? We only want three basic things, right? We want maybe a wife. Yeah, but like, people really need, like, we need to like allow people to have those basic things that they need, right? And then we should allow people to also have more than the basic things, but like without compromising the basic things that we need for the evolution of consciousness. Yeah.
Oh, the evolution of consciousness.
All right, last one, which is just sort of like a just an observation that an RGB smart contract can't encumber Bitcoin, in the sense that you can always just kind of violate the terms of the contract. So the maximum penalty in RGB is the contract state getting burned, because you can always sort of disregard the contract.
Yes, however, we've built tools for that. One of them is called Prometheus, and it's like a system of state channels that like it basically is like this arbiter of a multi-sig that's collateralized by a stake that can be slashed if the rules are violated, and it's like super over collateralized to do just about anything. And there's also like the question of how do you like tokenize the collateral that like backs the asset. Like, it's kind of circular there. But if you can solve for both those problems, just like either through money or some other everything, then you can essentially solve for, and I think both problems can just be solved through just throwing large amounts of cash at the problem. Then you don't need to change Bitcoin in order to have these sort of encumbrances and also still validate using client-side validation and encumber UTXOs with certain rules.
So the Prometheus is a party to the UTXO, and so it can make sure that when the UTXO is spent, there's a valid state transition.
Right.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's the validator is slashed.
Right.
By some arbiter node.
Got it. Makes sense. Yep. Cool. I'm done.
What do you think?
Oh man, it's hard to say.
I have a question.
Yeah.
After hearing all this, do you have a sense now, a better sense now of why, when I first saw RGB, it just instantly solidified myself as a Bitcoin maximalist, because I was like, wow, we can build everything on Bitcoin with these tools. And would you agree with that?
Oof. I think we can build a whole lot. I think that there's a lot of things that I don't actually think are that beneficial, that are very hard to do, but they are things that people want a lot.
Like what?
This weird shared pool.
AMMs.
Yeah, AMMs, and they kind of want all these this weird shitcoin ecosystem. I think we can build a lot of the worthwhile things on Bitcoin. I think that there will always be a sort of smart contract shitcoin casino that is going to be really hard to emulate.
So we will absolutely be able to support those use cases on the alternate layer ones, Abraxas and Prime.
Yeah, I mean, it's called optimize the function, ignore the form, right? I think from first principles, if I want, I can't say, hey, I want to drink tequila, but really, I really want to drink alcohol, right? Alcohol is what I really want, not tequila. So essentially, it's what do people really want, and how do we give it to them, the core thing they want, without literally trying to say, oh, here is tequila, you must drink tequila, right? And so that's how I think about it when it comes to RGB. I think pretty much, I don't think I'm wrong, but we're gonna see we like to kind of do things, and then the result shows for itself, right? I think it's way better than the way the shitcoin community has ended up being more hey, we're gonna go raise a bunch of money for this, and they don't build anything. Actually, that's what got me so angry in crypto in 2017-18. I know a bunch of people that raised millions of dollars to go change banking and finance in Africa. One of them has never been to fucking Africa. Not every single one of them. Yeah. And guess what? Oh, they can sweet talk. They raised all this money.
Mr. Beast did more for Africa when he built the wells, you know?
Yeah, so it's and these things really keep me really humble.
Are you guys related, by the way?
The Hunter Beast and Mr. Beast.
That's a good one.
You should claim him. He's a Taurus, actually.
He's a Taurus?
Yeah.
Not a Gemini? Oh,
no. You can tell.
Yeah.
No, I mean, derailed your point there, but it's a really solid point. I think, even just having a solid marketing department, I think is something that, you can kind of advertise oh, we're going to do this, this, and this, and it's going to be so awesome. And then people kind of think that the future of finance looks like this weird sort of DeFi land thing that maybe doesn't
that's
actually.
A problem that solves itself as the products mature, because people are champing at the bit to any little progress, amplify any level of progress in our products, and so I'm not worried at all about building a product and nobody's going to use it. If we build it, they will come.
Yeah, I mean more that it's easy to market something that will never be built. You can if you have the right marketing department, you have the right kind of
if you deliver a product, that's when your problems start.
Exactly.
Right? Then you get these things called users. They want features. They want you to fix crippling bugs that make them lose all their money.
Exactly.
What's the next milestone that people can look forward to from DIBA?
Well,
the goats. So So essentially, right, we built the like, as Hunter said, right, with Odex, right? We built like a marketplace called Deeper Marketplace, where you can, using the wallet, you can buy and do like primary and secondary sales of like unique digital assets, right? We call them UDAs.
And so UDAs are the
NFTs,
the RGB 21. Yeah.
that we implemented, which allows you to actually have high definition art, right? Because of Carbonado, right?
Is the art stored in the RGB contract state, or is it stored elsewhere?
Well, it can be in the consignment up to 16 megabytes embedded. However, if it's larger and we want to be able to support larger,
is the 16 megabits like a protocol limit?
It is a protocol limit.
Got it.
Yeah.
What size is each update, by the way? Is there a maximum size on each new consignment of like the new state that's being added?
I assume it would be a similar amount.
Got it.
Yeah. But also, like if you want to get larger though, like we want to absolutely support high definition assets, and that's why we built Carbonado. And like Carbonado is a very flexible format. It supports encryption compression, encryption, forward error correction codes, and stream verification in that order, at least like when you're encoding, and then reverse that order for decoding. And you can also turn off any one of these like functionalities using a Bitmask. And so we go from C0 to C15 for all of these features. And C0 is just like you just add a Carbonado header and nothing else. C15 is all of them. And so one thing that what's really interesting is that I saw this cool thing called Bitstream come out just today. It's like a decentralized storage like mechanism incentivization capability on Bitcoin. And I kind of half jokingly but more seriously tweeted like, this would be a great backend for a Carbonado node. And so like we have the intention to support multiple backends with Carbonado, including BitTorrent and SFTP and just all sorts of things, and that one too, and Bitstream. And so like it's kind of implementation agnostic because it's such like a simple and flexible protocol. It's not a protocol, it's a format. And so and we use this format to basically fill in for functionality that doesn't exist if it's not on that platform. Like Bitstream does solve for a lot of what we solve for in similar ways, because I noticed that, for example, with BitVM they re-implemented Blake 3. We use Blake 3 extensively in the Carbonado format for stream verification, which is like a core like the core way that we use to verify remotely that data exists using these like sort of challenges. And we just ask for like a random portion and say like a 1 gigabyte file, like 500 megabytes in, we're going to ask for 1 kilobyte of data. And then when you send me that 1 kilobyte of data plus a checksum, I will use that. I will basically use get the state from the Blake 3, what's essentially a Merkle hash, and kind of roll up to it with a checksum, and then hash that with the data itself, and I will be able to verify at that arbitrary offset within the file that that data is the correct data within that file without needing to know any of the other data at any other parts of that file. And then I can issue these challenges, at other places over time. And that's how I kind of like re-implemented like the PL, Protocol Labs proof of work or proof of replication, like just using a hash algorithm instead of like this Pee Wee Herman's breakfast machine of like BLS signatures that are like require a GPU to accelerate snark proofs. Yeah, it's like what? Like, why do I need a GPU in a server? Like that doesn't. It's just anyway. Yeah. So we solved this in a really clever and performant way, and we don't need a blockchain to do it, except unless we're using Bitstream, then I guess we could. But Carbonado itself is blockchain agnostic, and it scales quite well, we like to think, and it also is end-to-end encrypted by default. It requires a secret key to encode and decode, because it has to sign almost as like an authorization mechanism on encoding, and then it has to, of course, for decryption, it needs the secret key as well.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean, it got super technical again. So it's always Hunter, right? So, but then, we thought to release something called GOATs, right? This concept came about when we were in Miami like 2 years ago.
GOATS?
GOATS, yeah. So it's going to be called Gift of Adoption Token. So it's more like, I thought it's going to be like something pretty cool, right? Like if we look at like bringing like the CryptoPunks, and then, the Bored Ape kind of PFP things, right? And kind of merge them together, right? And call it like GOATs for Bitcoin, and just allow people to like end up like issuing the first Turing complete smart contracts on Bitcoin, and have people like just get to use it on Diva Marketplace. I just thought it's going to be like a pretty good way to show our users all these complex things that we discussed about, and how we're able to like demystify it and make it super easy for people to use. Right, and so that's gonna be released pretty soon. Nice. So yeah, I want the community to go have fun.
Nice. Yeah. You'll never be able to compete with Pepe RGB.
Oh, Pepe RGB. I'm like the guy that made it, Pepe RGB. I'm like, bro, like anything. He was like, he woke up, was like, Gideon, my life changed. The guy's in France, and I'm like, I didn't tell you to do anything, right? Yeah. That
Good for you, bro.
But I'm happy that like for him, I think like, building products that can change people's lives is what we're in here for, right? And I mean, of course, he's still sweating and suffering away from everybody from China. Like the community is like, the Pepe community is like 90% Chinese, bro, and they're all telling him, the whole chat is all in Mandarin, so we have to wake up, translate everything to English, translate it back again to reply. It's like it's all like, yeah. Anna has been doing a great job. So Anna is our head of marketing. She's based in London. Yeah, we've been great friends for a long time. Of course, she's the only person in the team because we don't have any marketing, right? Yeah, so she's just been waking up in the morning, doing the community thing, doing translation, trying to like support everybody. It's completely crazy. I kind of felt that we're gonna get to this stage, but it came too sudden. Yeah. Right. It's like it came too sudden. Hunter was like looking at the whole thing because he thought it was a DDoS attack before.
It was just the Chinese.
Right? Yeah. It was crazy.
I remember tailing the server log on our LND Hub X server because we do have custodial lightning support, and it was just like the Matrix. Like it was just like it was just like flowing across like journal CTL-F, and I was just like seeing it come across, and I was like, is this a DDoS? And then I was looking across, and I'm like seeing like also Carbonado files, and that's going up, and I'm like, well, it's pretty hard to like do both of these things at the same time unless you're actually using our wallet.
Nice.
Okay, I think we're almost definitely at 2 hours at this point, so we should
wrap
it up. I mean, we can final thoughts it. I mean, I just want to say like thank you, guys. I knew he was gonna do this in terms of the like technical questioning. That's why I warned you. I was like, you gotta bring on a dev.
Really good, really good to just have that like very like step by step.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's like part of what people come to this. It's the sugar that helps the medicine go down of thing. It's like part of the like what we do here, and I think it's just like to people who
nice Werther's original, and then bam, Robitussin right down the fucking throat.
Exactly. But it's like it's an interesting example of like people sometimes ask if they can come on the podcast, and like I'm like, I don't know if you know what you're signing up for in terms of like getting Casey to ask you questions about your thing. Like it's so I appreciate it, you guys.
Thanks so much, guys, for coming. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah.
And thanks for, this is the first time we've had guests from out of town join us, which is awesome. So putting cool. HMP on the map.
Truly. In an undisclosed location on the western coast of the United States of America.
We didn't put up that guy so you can see my my kitchen this time.
Whole, kitchen situation.
So do you cook?
I do. Yeah, I like to cook.
What do you like cooking?
Just normal stuff. I don't know. I've been cooking in a wok a lot recently. I got a really great, like a wok, and there's this awesome recipe book called The Wok by Kenji Lopez Alt, which just has a bunch of fun recipes to make. What else do I make? I don't know.
It's nice whenever Casey gets better kitchen stuff, then he gives me his like worst version of it.
Yeah,
so I just got his old wok. And I was like, nice.
Yeah, maybe we should do a dinner session where everybody gets to cook, right?
Yeah.
Aaron, do you cook?
Yeah, I cook.
You sure? What do you cook?
She's very domestic.
I am very domestic. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Like you dress like a cat, right? So like, cat never really
Yeah, I
goes
mean,
out.
look, I'm in a maid outfit.
Yeah. I think like I love your outfit so much because like I love people that sometimes go extra mile on everything. Like like look at the gloves and then the shoes too. So it's like thank you very much for hosting us, Casey.
Oh yeah, my pleasure.
I've always looked forward to having this conversation, and I told Erin in Stanford, right? Like this is like what I've always thought about, like how do we get to this, and like working to get Bitcoin to the next stage of where it should be. It's like I think it's a great work that we're doing, and it can be very painful and hard. Most people don't get it. Yeah, so I'm happy to be part of this whole story and this whole journey.
Well, I think that there's definitely like a perception that sometimes there's like a bunch of haters, and that is absolutely not the case. I feel oftentimes when we're building with RGB, like we feel a lot of love from the community. We feel so much just support, and like there are definitely some haters, but there's not like a lot of necessity for that, or like a lot of like, because like we don't feel like we're in competition with anybody necessarily. It's such like a big greenfield space that we're solving such a huge like ambitious thing we're doing, that we don't necessarily like the market is so big that it's not saturated enough for us to feel like we're in competition just yet. And also like we've had a 2-year head start, so that helps some. But the other thing is, I do want to express my gratitude to the degens and supporters and just other folks who have been really helpful to us.
Yeah.
And
we love the degens.
Yeah, Crypto Clay and like also I don't want to go. Actually, I shouldn't play favorites.
Names,
you'll leave somebody out.
Yeah, it's not under the company codes and conduct. We should get like a general counsel that will tell us what you can say and what you cannot say.
Yeah.
That's actually the bad part of actually building a product that is getting like being used by more and more people. Because like you can't just freely say anything you want to say anymore.
Oh my God, how many times did I say inscription numbers are a shitcoin, and then they started blaming Casey for saying it. I was like, sorry, bro.
And then and just also if there are people who want to who see this and want to support the projects involved and think this is cool tech, definitely check out bitmask.app and like poke around at it. Look at diba.io. Hopefully will be launched at some point in the future, and you'll be able to purchase some UDAs. And in addition, I highly recommend that you support the LNPBP Standards Association. They have a really good geyser page that allows you to use Lightning or on-chain Bitcoin to make donations, and you can also support Maxim Orlovsky directly on GitHub sponsors or the LNPB. I think RGB, GitHub sponsors works there too. And if you'd rather use fiat, and GitHub stars count for a lot too, so check out like bitmask-core.com, bitmask-core.io, or .io, not .com. I actually probably should have registered like something easier to say, because like there's so many different, but it goes in line with our
BMC, we can use BMC.io.
So something like that. But anyway, Bitmask Core, it's that's where we keep all our core code, and if anybody wants to pick through that and see, like we have good first issues that you can take a look at that might help us out. Definitely like see if you can poke around and be maybe hopefully gentle with the wallet, but also definitely like help us like, you know, work through our bugs and, you know, like hopefully cooperatively instead of adversarially, but you know, like we totally get there are definitely bugs in the wallet. It's not perfect, but we it's an iterative process, and we're also incredibly ambitious with what we're trying to do. So, you know, like, and like we're just really pushing the boundaries of what you can do with RGB tech. Like, for example, one thing that we're really proud of doing in addition to the swaps is transfer batching, where, you know, like the minute you do a transfer, if you do another transfer to someone else and your transfer is currently sitting in the mempool, then and it's tying up your UTXO, instead of saying no, you can't transfer to someone else, it'll then bump your UTXO with an RBF and then create a new commitment to a new state transition that commits to both. And then you can keep doing that, you know, as long as you want, and until it's confirmed in the block. And that could save users a lot in fees, and also dramatically improve the user experience, so you're not like waiting for the next block to confirm in order to make your next transaction. And we think that could have like really good implications for payroll. And so, you know, hopefully once you know, Tether is launched on RDB, which should be very exciting to see, then we and that was like a commitment made by Palo Arduino not too long ago. Then we hopefully we'll see more, you know, utility and getting the bugs fleshed out and making sure it's all, you know, like just really useful for people, really truly useful for people in their daily lives.
Awesome.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
This is great.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll see everybody next time.
Next time. Bye. Bye.